The Galactic Academy of Xenobiology, perched on Tertius Prime's largest moon, like a chrome and glass monument to interspecies cooperation. And bureaucratic overreach. 300 levels of academic excellence, they called it. Dakota Wells called it 300 levels of trying not to accidentally start a war by sneezing too loudly in advanced predator studies. Today was shaping up to be one of those days. Professor Yulani Grex stood at the front of Laboratory 847-Beta, her 6 arms gesticulating with the kind of theatrical flair that suggested she'd missed her calling as a holovid director. Her species, the Xanthari, were known for their dramatic tendencies and their unfortunate habit of treating every lecture like a performance worthy of standing ovations. "Students," she announced, her voice carrying that particular tone professors used when they were about to ruin everyone's day. "Today we embark upon a most extraordinary educational opportunity." Dakota slouched lower in their seat, already sensing disaster approaching at warp speed. Around the semicircular classroom, their fellow students perked up with varying degrees of enthusiasm and species-appropriate body language. Zilani, the perpetually nervous Flufari in the front row, began that subtle ear-twitching that meant she was either excited or about to bolt for the nearest exit. Knowing Zilani, it was probably both. The Flufari looked like someone had crossbred a rabbit with a small deer, and then decided the result wasn't quite anxious enough. They were herbivores from a garden world where the most dangerous predator was a particularly aggressive flower that might give you a mild rash. Zilani had chosen advanced predator studies the way some beings chose experimental surgery, with hope, terror, and a complete lack of understanding about what they were getting themselves into. To Dakota's left, Thex was already calculating something on his portable analysis unit. The Vorthak were crystalline beings who approached every problem like a mathematical equation that just needed the right formula. Thex looked like a living geode, with delusions of scientific grandeur, and he treated Dakota with the kind of wary respect usually reserved for unexploded ordnance, which, to be fair, wasn't entirely inaccurate. "We will be conducting," Professor Grex continued, clearly savoring the dramatic pause, "a live predator observation exercise." The classroom erupted in a symphony of species-specific panic responses. Zilani's ears went completely flat against her skull. 3 of the mollusk exchange students began secreting stress slime. Even Thex's crystalline structure flickered with what Dakota had learned to recognize as the Vorthak equivalent of, "Oh, stellar winds, what have I gotten myself into?" Dakota, meanwhile, was trying very hard not to laugh. Now, Professor Grex soothed, though her tone suggested she was enjoying the chaos just a little too much. "Before you begin calculating the statistical likelihood of your academic careers ending in digestion, let me explain the parameters of our exercise." She gestured toward the reinforced observation chamber that dominated one wall of the laboratory. It was a transparent aluminum box roughly the size of Dakota's dorm room, complete with environmental controls, monitoring equipment, and what appeared to be enough fail-safes to contain a small supernova. "Each of you will observe our subject and compile a comprehensive field report on predator behavior, hunting strategies, threat assessment, and survival adaptations. This report will constitute 40% of your final grade in advanced predator studies." Zilani made a small whimpering sound that might have been a question or possibly a prayer to whatever deities the Flufari worshipped, probably ones associated with not being eaten. "Professor," Thex's voice carried the precise harmonics that meant he was accessing his species' collective database in real time. "What classification of predator are we observing? My preliminary calculations suggest We should establish safety protocols based on— Ah! Professor Grex held up one of her 6 hands. That would be telling, wouldn't it? Half the educational value lies in your ability to assess and categorize the subject based on direct observation. Dakota was now actively biting the inside of their cheek to keep from grinning. They had a pretty good idea where this was headed, and it was going to be absolutely hilarious. The kind of hilarious that you definitely couldn't laugh about without causing an intergalactic incident. The Academy had very strict policies about intergalactic incidents. Something about maintaining diplomatic relations and not accidentally declaring war on entire star systems because a human found something funny. Dakota had signed at least 17 different waivers about that particular issue. The subject, Professor Grex announced with the kind of dramatic timing that would have made Shakespearean actors weep with envy, has been graciously provided by the Terran diplomatic mission. It represents a prime example of what Earth xenobiologists classify as a domestic micropredator. The stress slime production in the room immediately doubled. Dakota knew they should probably speak up, should probably mention that they had extensive experience with Earth's so-called micropredators. Should probably explain that the term domestic wasn't some kind of Terran military designation designed to fool unwary aliens into underestimating Earth's fauna. Instead, they decided to see how this played out. For science. And because watching Thex try to calculate the threat parameters of what was almost certainly someone's pet cat was going to be the highlight of their semester. Now, Professor Grex continued, clearly building toward her grand reveal, I want everyone to take their positions at the observation stations. Remember, we are dealing with a creature evolved on what the Galactic Threat Assessment Bureau has classified as a Class 12 death world. Maintain appropriate distance, keep your personal shields active, and whatever you do, do not attempt direct interaction without proper authorization. The students began shuffling toward the observation stations with all the enthusiasm of beings walking toward their own executions. Zilani had gone so pale that her normally lavender fur was approaching a sickly gray. Thex was muttering calculations under his breath in mathematical profanity that would have made a Vorthak supercomputer blush. Dakota selected an observation station near the back, partly for the better view and partly because they wanted to watch their classmates' reactions without being in the direct line of sight when the revelation hit. Behold, Professor Grex declared, activating the chamber's entry sequence, a prime specimen of Felis catus, more commonly known by its Terran designation as— The door slid open. Into the chamber walked Assistant Curator Brinks, a cheerful mollusk who handled the department's live specimens. He was carrying what appeared to be a standard animal transport container, the kind used for moving small, non-dangerous creatures between facilities. The Terran house cat. And that's when Dakota finally lost the battle against their composure. Because Brinks had just released into the observation chamber one extremely ordinary, slightly overweight, orange tabby cat, who immediately proceeded to demonstrate the full extent of his terrifying predatory nature by sitting down and beginning to groom his left paw with the kind of intense concentration usually reserved for disarming antimatter explosives. The nameplate on his collar read, Buttons. Buttons, the apex predator. Dakota managed to turn their laugh into something that might have passed for a cough, but it was a near thing. Around the room, their fellow students were staring at the chamber with the kind of horrified fascination usually reserved for natural disasters or particularly gruesome holovid documentaries. Observe the predator's immediate territorial assessment, Professor Grex narrated, apparently oblivious to the fact that Buttons had just flopped over onto his side and was now presenting his belly to the universe in the most non-threatening display possible. Note how it surveys its environment for potential threats and prey opportunities. Zilani was taking notes with the desperate intensity of someone whose academic career depended on accurately documenting every moment of what she clearly believed was her impending doom. Subject appears to be exposing vital organs? Is this a dominance display? Fascinating, Thex muttered, his analysis unit practically smoking from computational overload. The creature appears to be deliberately compromising its defensive posture. This suggests either supreme confidence in its abilities or some form of psychological warfare designed to lure prey into a false sense of security. Dakota was going to need medical attention if they had to listen to much more of this. Buttons, completely unaware that he was the subject of intense xenobiological scrutiny, rolled over again and began batting at a dust mote with the kind of focused intensity that suggested he had mistaken it for the most dangerous prey in the known galaxy. "Excellent observational skills, Thex," Professor Grex said approvingly. "The literature does suggest that Terran predators are capable of remarkably sophisticated hunting strategies. What else do we observe?" "Professor," one of the mollusk students ventured, "why does the predator appear to be vibrating?" Dakota bit their cheek harder. Buttons had discovered a patch of artificial sunlight from the chamber's environmental controls and was now purring with the kind of contentment that could probably be detected by seismic equipment. "Ah, yes," Professor Grex said, consulting her notes. "That would be the subsonic vocalization pattern. Terran predators use this technique to disorient prey before striking. The frequency is apparently designed to induce a false sense of calm in potential victims." Zilani's ears disappeared entirely beneath her desk. It's weaponizing sound waves?" "According to the literature," Professor Grex confirmed, "this purring mechanism is one of the most insidious aspects of Terran micropredator behavior. Victims report feeling inexplicably compelled to approach and even physically contact the predator, despite obvious danger." Dakota was pretty sure they were going to need reconstructive surgery on their cheek at this point, but watching their classmates develop elaborate theories about the tactical applications of cat purrs was worth every moment of pain. Buttons, meanwhile, had apparently decided that the dust mote was either defeated or unworthy of his attention. He stretched once, yawned in a way that displayed an impressive array of sharp teeth, and then proceeded to curl up in the patch of artificial sunlight for what was clearly going to be a comprehensive nap. "Note the predator's confidence," Professor Grex observed. "It demonstrates no fear of our observation, suggesting it either does not perceive us as a threat, or is so certain of its own abilities that our presence is irrelevant." "Could it be waiting?" Thex asked, his voice carrying the kind of hushed terror usually reserved for discussing cosmic horrors. "Conserving energy for an optimal strike opportunity?" "Highly probable," Professor Grex agreed. "Terran evolution produced some of the most efficient killing machines in known space. Every action, every apparent moment of passivity, serves a greater predatory purpose." Dakota looked at Buttons, who was now snoring softly, while somehow managing to maintain perfect balance in his chosen sunbeam. His little pink tongue was sticking out slightly, and one paw was twitching in what was probably a dream about tuna, or possibly that dust mote's unconditional surrender. This was going to be a very long semester. But as Dakota settled in to observe their classmates' mounting terror at the sheer domestic tranquility of one slightly overweight house cat, they couldn't help but think that advanced predator studies was turning out to be far more educational than they'd expected. Just not in the way Professor Grex had probably intended. The assignment was simple. Observe the predator, document its behavior, assess the threat level, and file a comprehensive field report. Dakota was pretty sure their report was going to be very different from everyone else's, and they were absolutely right about that. Buttons had been napping for approximately 47 minutes when the universe decided to remind everyone why you should never get too comfortable during a predator observation exercise. Dakota had been watching their classmates with growing amusement as they developed increasingly elaborate theories about feline tactical doctrine. Zilani had filled 3 pages with detailed sketches of Button's resting attack position, complete with annotations about optimal pouncing angles and the strategic value of exposing one's belly to create target confusion in potential prey. Thex, meanwhile, had calculated that Button's breathing rate, combined with his occasional ear twitches, suggested a sensory awareness network capable of detecting threats within a 12-meter radius. This was based on absolutely nothing except the fact that Buttons had briefly opened one eye when someone in the hallway had dropped what sounded like a maintenance toolkit. "Fascinating," Professor Grex murmured, making her own notes on a pad that was probably going to become the foundation for next semester's Advanced Theoretical Xenopredator Psychology course. Observe how the creature maintains perfect environmental awareness, even during apparent dormancy. Dakota was about to point out that cats were just naturally light sleepers when Buttons suddenly sat up with the kind of instant alertness that suggested his nap time was officially over. The change was dramatic enough that Zilani actually squeaked and dove behind her observation station. Even Dakota had to admit there was something mildly unsettling about watching a creature go from completely relaxed to fully alert in the space of a heartbeat. "Here we go," Professor Grex whispered, and Dakota could practically hear her thinking about tenure committees and research grants. Phase 2. Active hunting behavior. Buttons stood up, stretched in that elaborate way cats do when they want to make sure every single vertebra is properly aligned for optimal performance, and then began what could only be described as a comprehensive threat assessment of his environment. His head swiveled left, then right. His ears rotated like tiny radar dishes, apparently cataloging every sound in the audible spectrum, and probably a few that weren't. His tail, which had been relaxed, and still during his nap, was now moving in slow, controlled arcs that Thex was no doubt interpreting as some kind of advanced targeting system. "Note the systematic scanning pattern," Professor Grex breathed into her recorder. "The predator is clearly establishing a tactical map of the terrain." Dakota watched Buttons complete his survey of the observation chamber, which consisted mainly of empty space, the environmental control panel, and a small water dish that Curator Brinks had thoughtfully provided. There wasn't much to tactically map, but Buttons was approaching the task with the kind of professional thoroughness that suggested he took his reputation as an apex predator very seriously. And then he saw it. In the far corner of the chamber, partially hidden by the base of the environmental control unit, a small maintenance drone was performing routine atmospheric readings. It was roughly the size of Dakota's fist, equipped with multiple sensor arrays, and, most importantly from Buttons' perspective, it had a single blue LED that blinked once every 3 seconds. The effect on Buttons was immediate and profound. His pupils dilated to roughly the size of small planets. His tail went from lazy curves to sharp, precise movements that looked like he was conducting a very dangerous orchestra. Every muscle in his body shifted into what Dakota recognized as hunt mode, but which their classmates were probably interpreting as preparing for wholesale slaughter. "Holy spiral galaxies," Thex whispered, his crystalline structure flickering with what Dakota was pretty sure was the Vorthak equivalent of pants-wetting terror. It's identified a target. Zilani had gone completely silent, which in Flufari body language meant she was either fascinated or had entered some kind of protective catatonic state. Given that she was still taking notes with desperate intensity, Dakota figured it was probably the former. Buttons began his approach. If Dakota had been writing the field report from a purely objective standpoint, they would have noted that Buttons demonstrated textbook feline hunting behavior: low crouch, careful paw placement, absolute focus on the target, and the kind of patience that suggested he was prepared to wait until the heat death of the universe, if that's what it took, to get within pouncing range of that blinking LED. From their classmates' perspective, however, they were witnessing the methodical approach of a Terran killing machine that had just selected its first victim. "Observe the predator's approach pattern," Professor Grex narrated, her voice carrying the kind of hushed awe usually reserved for documenting natural disasters. "Note the absolute silence of movement, the calculated positioning, the complete focus on the target." Dakota had to admit, Buttons was putting on quite a show. He moved across the chamber floor like liquid death, each paw placed with surgical precision, his entire body coiled for the strike. The maintenance drone continued its oblivious sensor readings, its LED blinking away like a tiny blue beacon saying, "Please eat me, I'm delicious." Is it? Is it actually going to attack the mechanical device? One of the mollusk students asked, their stress slime production reaching levels that were probably going to require professional cleanup. Terran predators are known to hunt prey across a wide spectrum of organic and mechanical targets, Professor Grex replied, consulting her notes with the kind of academic authority that was utterly divorced from reality. Their adaptability is considered one of their most dangerous characteristics. Buttons had reached optimal pouncing distance. Dakota could practically see him calculating trajectory, force vectors, and the aerodynamics of drone catching. His haunches shifted slightly, gathering power for what was clearly going to be the most devastating attack on electronic equipment in the history of interspecies education. The maintenance drone blinked. Buttons pounced. What followed was 3 seconds of pure feline athleticism that would have made professional Hollywood choreographers weep with envy. Buttons launched himself through the air with the kind of precision that suggested he had calculated the trajectory to 17 decimal places, intercepted the maintenance drone at the peak of his arc, and brought it down with the efficiency of a guided missile system. The drone never stood a chance. There was a brief electronic squeak, the sound of small components being enthusiastically redistributed, and then silence. Buttons stood over his defeated prey, tail lashing in triumph, looking enormously pleased with himself. The maintenance drone lay in several pieces, its LED no longer blinking, its sensors no longer sensing, its entire existence reduced to what was probably going to be a very awkward maintenance requisition form. The classroom was dead silent. "Holy cosmic winds," Zelani whispered, her voice barely audible. It killed a machine with its bare paws." "The literature mentions this," Thex said, his analysis unit now producing small sparks from computational overload. "Terran predators demonstrate adaptive hunting protocols that extend beyond traditional organic prey relationships. They can identify and neutralize mechanical targets based on movement patterns, energy signatures, or apparently, just because they blink." Dakota was torn between pride at Buttons's obvious satisfaction with his hunting prowess and concern about what their classmates were going to put in their field reports. At this rate, Earth cats were going to be classified as some kind of biotechnological warfare system. Buttons, meanwhile, had moved on to the next phase of successful predation. Playing with his kill. He batted at one of the drone's detached sensor arrays, sent it skittering across the chamber floor, and then pounced on it again with the kind of joyful enthusiasm that suggested he considered this the highlight of his academic career. "Note the post-kill behavior," Professor Grex said, her voice filled with the kind of scientific fascination that was definitely going to result in some very uncomfortable conversations with the Terran diplomatic mission. "The Predator appears to be testing the effectiveness of its attack, ensuring the target is completely neutralized. Or it could be practicing combat techniques for future encounters," Thex suggested, which was probably the most terrifying interpretation of cat playing with toy that Dakota had ever heard. That's when the alarms started. Not the gentle chimes that indicated class changes or meal periods, but the deep, urgent tones that meant something had gone seriously wrong somewhere in the Academy's 300 levels of academic excellence. The observation chamber's environmental controls automatically activated emergency protocols, bathing everything in the red light that universally meant, "Please proceed to your designated panic stations in an orderly fashion while trying not to think about how you're probably going to die." "Attention all personnel," the Academy's AI announced over the communications system, its normally calm voice carrying just a hint of the electronic equivalent of barely controlled terror. "We have a Code Crimson security breach in levels 127 through 132. All students and faculty are to remain in their current locations until further notice. Repeat, remain in your current locations. Do not attempt to evacuate. Do not attempt to investigate. Security teams are responding." Professor Grex looked around the classroom with the kind of expression that suggested she was rapidly recalculating her life insurance policies. Code Crimson was Academy speak for "something actively dangerous is loose in the building, and we're not entirely sure what it is or where it went." Dakota felt a familiar tingle at the base of their skull, the kind of instinctive awareness that had kept them alive during their military service. Something was wrong. Not just minor administrative inconvenience wrong, but people are about to die wrong. In the observation chamber, Buttons had stopped playing with the drone fragments. His head was raised, ears forward, and he was staring at something none of them could see. His tail had gone completely still, and his body language had shifted from playful predator to something that Dakota recognized with uncomfortable clarity. Buttons was scared. That was when Dakota realized that their little academic exercise in predator observation was about to become a lot more educational than anyone had planned. "Professor," Zilani whispered, her voice shaking, "what's a Code Crimson?" Professor Grex checked her emergency protocols handbook with hands that were definitely not as steady as they had been 5 minutes ago. "It means," she said slowly, "that something has breached Academy security. Something that the automated systems can't identify or contain." Through the observation deck's reinforced windows, Dakota could see security teams running through the corridors with the kind of urgency that suggested whatever had triggered Code Crimson was both immediate and extremely dangerous. "What kind of something?" Thex asked, though his tone suggested he really didn't want to know the answer. Professor Grex consulted her handbook again, flipping through pages with increasing desperation. "The protocols they don't specify exactly what— Oh!" Her face went completely pale, which in Zenthari physiology meant a shift from deep purple to something approaching lavender. "Oh," Dakota prompted, though they were pretty sure they weren't going to like the answer. "According to this," Professor Grex said, her voice barely above a whisper, "Code Crimson is reserved for situations involving entities that pose an existential threat to Academy personnel. Entities that standard security measures cannot adequately address. In the observation chamber, Buttons had begun making a sound that Dakota had never heard from him before. It wasn't a purr or a meow, or any of the normal cat vocalizations that their classmates had been analyzing with such academic intensity. It was a growl, low, continuous, and filled with the kind of primal warning that transcended species barriers. Whatever was loose in the academy, Buttons could sense it coming, and he was absolutely terrified, which meant Dakota realized, with the kind of crystal-clear certainty that came from too many years of combat experience, that everyone in Laboratory 847 Beta was about to find out what a real predator looked like. Dakota had encountered exactly 3 things in their military career that had made their blood run cold. The first was watching a hegemony battlecruiser decloak directly above their transport. The second was realizing their squad was surrounded by void hunters on Kepler 442b with no ammunition and no backup. The third was watching a house cat named Buttons display genuine, instinctive fear. Because if something could scare a creature that had just murdered a maintenance drone with the casual efficiency of a professional assassin, then everyone in Laboratory 847 Beta was about to have a very bad day. The thing materialized through the wall like smoke given malevolent purpose. Dakota's first thought was that someone had taken the concept of living shadow and decided it needed more teeth and a serious attitude problem. The creature was roughly humanoid in shape, but composed of what appeared to be dark energy held together by cosmic spite and bad intentions. It moved with liquid grace, phasing in and out of solid matter as if the laws of physics were merely suggestions it chose to ignore. Zelani took one look at the thing and fainted so completely that she managed to maintain perfect academic posture even while unconscious, her notepad still clutched in one paw. Thex's crystalline structure began resonating at frequencies that suggested he was either trying to calculate their chances of survival or attempting to achieve enlightenment through mathematical panic. "Ketharan Shade Beast," he whispered, his voice carrying harmonics of absolute terror. "Level 9 extra-dimensional predator. Feeds on sentient brain tissue, capable of phase shifting through solid matter." "Well," Dakota muttered, instinctively reaching for weapons they weren't carrying because this was supposed to be a peaceful academic environment. "That's significantly worse than a pop quiz." The Shade Beast had apparently noticed their little educational gathering. Its head, or the part that might generously be called a head, turned toward the observation deck with the kind of predatory interest that suggested it had just upgraded them from background scenery to potential lunch buffet. In the observation chamber, Buttons had gone completely still. Not the relaxed stillness of a napping cat, but the absolute motionlessness of a predator that knew something much more dangerous was hunting in its territory. "Everyone remain calm," Professor Grex announced, with the kind of forced authority that suggested she was approximately 3 seconds away from joining Zelani in unconsciousness. "Security protocols indicate that we should—" The Shade Beast phase shifted through the laboratory's reinforced door like it was made of tissue paper and malicious intent. That's when Dakota's military training kicked in with the subtlety of a tactical nuclear strike. "Everyone get behind the analysis stations," they snapped, their voice carrying the kind of command authority that made people move before their brains caught up. "Thex, I need you to calculate that thing's phase patterns. How long does it stay solid?" What?" Thex's crystalline form was flickering like a malfunctioning holoprojector. "You want me to analyze the predatory patterns of a creature that's currently trying to eat our cerebral cortexes?" 3 to 4 seconds, Dakota said, grabbing an emergency fire suppression unit from the wall. That's standard for most phase-shifting entities. They can't maintain corporeality for extended periods without massive energy expenditure. So when it solidifies to attack, we've got maybe 4 seconds to hit it with everything we've got. Professor Grex stared at Dakota with the kind of expression that suggested she was rapidly reevaluating her assumptions about human exchange students. How do you know about phase-shifting predator behavior? Because, Dakota said, checking the fire suppression unit's pressure gauge, I didn't spend 6 years in the Terran Defense Corps studying comparative literature. The Shade Beast had apparently finished its initial assessment of the laboratory and decided that the selection of terrified academics met its nutritional requirements. It began moving toward them with the kind of purposeful intent that suggested dinner was about to be served. That's when Buttons did something that surprised everyone, including Dakota. He attacked. Not the playful pounce he'd used on the maintenance drone, but a full contact, claws extended, yowling assault that would have made a Terran wildcat proud. He launched himself at the Shade Beast's approximate center of mass and proceeded to demonstrate why Earthcats had survived millions of years of evolution by being absolutely fearless in the face of anything that moved. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The Shade Beast, which had been moving with liquid confidence, suddenly found itself dealing with 10 pounds of enraged feline fury, equipped with razor-sharp claws and a complete lack of concern for its own safety. Impossible, Thex whispered. How can it physically interact with a phase-shifted entity? Dakota watched Buttons rake his claws across something that should have been incorporeal and felt a grin spreading across their face. Because cats don't give a damn about your physics. They operate on spite and stubbornness, and apparently that extends to interdimensional predators. The Shade Beast was clearly not prepared for this development. It phase-shifted frantically, trying to escape Buttons' assault, but somehow the cat managed to track its movements with supernatural accuracy. Every time the creature solidified, Buttons was there, claws and teeth ready to remind it that Earth predators didn't care about your fancy cosmic horror credentials. It's working, Professor Grex breathed. The Terran micro-predator is actually driving off a level 9 extra-dimensional entity. Buttons is providing us with tactical opportunity, Dakota said, hefting the fire suppression unit. When that thing solidifies to shake him off, I'm going to introduce it to high-pressure chemical foam. You're going to fight a Shade Beast with a fire extinguisher? Thex asked. Dakota checked the unit's activation trigger. I've fought worse things with less. Besides, sometimes the best strategy is the one your enemy doesn't expect. The Shade Beast finally managed to phase shift away from Buttons, but not before the cat had done some serious damage to its structural integrity. It materialized near the laboratory's main entrance, its form flickering with what Dakota recognized as pain responses. Buttons landed gracefully on the floor, his fur standing on end, making that low growling sound that suggested he was ready for round 2 whenever the universe felt like providing it. Now, Dakota whispered. The Shade Beast solidified for its attack run. Dakota was ready for it. The Shade Beast solidified with the kind of cosmic arrogance that suggested it had never encountered resistance from anything smaller than a battlecruiser. Its form rippled into full corporeality, energy crackling around what might generously be called its claws, and it prepared to demonstrate why Level 9 extra-dimensional predators didn't need to worry about academic fire safety equipment. Dakota hit it with the fire suppression unit at full pressure. The effect was immediate, spectacular, and absolutely nothing like what the manufacturer had intended when they designed the system for containing chemical fires in laboratory environments. High-pressure foam mixed with whatever exotic energies kept shade beasts corporeal, creating a reaction that was part chemical warfare and part interpretive dance performance. The creature shrieked in frequencies that made everyone's teeth ache, and several of Thex's crystalline components crack in sympathetic resonance. It thrashed wildly, trying to phase shift away from the foam, but apparently chemical fire suppressant had properties that interfered with interdimensional travel in ways that were going to give xenophysicists nightmares for decades. "It's working!" Professor Grex shouted over the din of cosmic horror meets industrial safety equipment. "The foam is preventing phase shift capability." "Basic chemistry," Dakota replied, maintaining pressure on the suppression unit while keeping well clear of the shade beast's increasingly desperate attempts to claw something, anything, in its immediate vicinity. Most extra-dimensional entities have trouble with complex molecular structures. Disrupts their energy matrix. Which was complete nonsense, of course, but it sounded appropriately scientific, and nobody was in a position to argue with results. Buttons, meanwhile, had apparently decided that the Shade Beast's distress was his cue for round 2. He launched himself back into combat with the enthusiasm of a creature that had found his true calling in life. Annoying cosmic horrors, until they went away. The combination of chemical foam and feline fury proved to be more than the Shade Beast could handle. It made one final, desperate attempt to escape, phase-shifting partially through the laboratory wall before getting stuck halfway between dimensions with buttons still attached to what might have been its head. That's when Dakota made their move. They'd been carrying the emergency toolkit from their observation station since the alarms started, partly out of habit and partly because military training had taught them that you never knew when you might need to improvise weapons from office supplies. The toolkit contained, among other things, a plasma cutter designed for precision work on delicate scientific instruments. It turned out to be extremely effective on interdimensional predators who were stuck between phases and couldn't dodge. The Shade Beast's death shriek was mercifully brief, though it did cause 3 separate fire alarms to activate and probably gave the Academy's AI some very confusing sensor readings. The creature collapsed into what appeared to be a pile of dark crystalline fragments that smoked gently and smelled like ozone mixed with existential dread. Buttons sat down next to the remains, began grooming his paw with the air of someone who had just completed a successful day at the office and promptly fell, asleep in the nearest patch of emergency lighting. The laboratory fell silent except for the gentle hum of ventilation systems trying to clear the air of interdimensional predator smoke and fire-suppressant foam. "Is it?" Zilani whispered, having regained consciousness just in time to witness the finale. "Is it dead?" Dakota prodded the remains with the plasma cutter. Nothing moved, phased, or attempted to eat anyone's brain tissue. "Extremely dead," they confirmed. Professor Grex looked around the laboratory, taking in the chemical foam, the smoking alien remains, the unconscious house cat, and the human exchange student who was calmly cleaning interdimensional predator blood off a precision-cutting tool. "I think," she said slowly, "we may need to revise our assessment protocols." 3 days later, Dakota was sitting in their dorm room, reviewing the field reports that had been submitted for advanced predator studies. The assignment had been simple: observe the predator, document its behavior, assess the threat level, and file a comprehensive report. The results were absolutely hilarious. Zilani had submitted 47 pages of detailed analysis on Terran micro-predator combat effectiveness against extra-dimensional threats. Her conclusion was that house cats should be immediately classified as Level 8 bioweapons, and that any planet capable of producing them should be approached with extreme diplomatic caution. Thex had calculated that Button's interdimensional awareness capabilities suggested sensory processing power equivalent to a military-grade tactical computer. His recommendation was that the Galactic Academy immediately establish a Department of Terran Predator Studies with appropriate funding for protective equipment and hazard pay. The mollusk students had collectively submitted a proposal for redesigning the Academy's security protocols to include Terran micro-predator response teams, equipped with specialized equipment for handling creatures that could apparently detect and engage phase-shifted entities through means that violated at least 17 known laws of physics. Even Professor Grex had filed a report recommending that Earth cats be added to the Galactic Threat Assessment Bureau's watch list, right between sentient plague vectors and weapons of mass psychological destruction. Dakota's report was somewhat different. Subject Observation Report. Felis catus. Designation Buttons. It began in the dry, professional tone that had served Dakota well throughout their military career. Observed subject for approximately 4.7 hours under controlled laboratory conditions. Subject demonstrated typical feline behavior including sleeping, 67% of observation period, grooming, 15%, recreational hunting of maintenance equipment, 12%, and interdimensional predator detection, harassment, 6%. Behavioral analysis. Subject displayed standard Earth house cat characteristics throughout observation period. Demonstrated normal, predator instincts when presented with moving objects, particularly those with blinking lights. Showed appropriate defensive responses when threatened by extra-dimensional entity, consistent with typical feline territorial behavior. Threat assessment. Subject poses minimal threat to Academy personnel or equipment, with the exception of small electronic devices and interdimensional predators. Recommend classification. Standard Earth house cat. Threat level. Minimal, unless you're allergic or a shade beast. Additional notes. Subject appears to enjoy having his belly rubbed and responds positively to treats. Has shown remarkable adaptability to academic environment and seems to enjoy the attention. Would recommend for permanent adoption by Academy personnel, preferably someone with experience in xenobiology and interdimensional security. Addendum. Please find attached 1-1 Kitharan Shade Beast Skull, properly preserved according to Academy specimen protocols. Thought the Xenobiology Department might find it educational. Also attached, requisition form for new maintenance drone. Previous unit was destroyed during routine predator observation exercise. Dakota printed the report, attached the requisition forms, and carefully packaged the Shade Beast's skull in a specimen container that had probably never been intended for interdimensional predator remains. As they walked across campus toward the Xenobiology Department's main office, they passed Laboratory 847 Beta, where Professor Grex was conducting her next section of advanced predator studies. Through the reinforced windows, Dakota could see a new group of students observing the same observation chamber. Buttons was still there, having apparently decided that the Academy's environmental controls and regular feeding schedule were vastly superior to whatever accommodations the Terran diplomatic mission had been providing. He was currently demonstrating his terrifying predatory instincts by batting at a piece of string that one of the braver students had provided. The new class was taking notes with the kind of intense focus that suggested they'd heard about the interdimensional predator incident, and were determined not to underestimate the creature responsible for single-handedly saving the Academy from cosmic horror. Dakota smiled and continued toward the department office. They had a field report to submit and a skull to donate to science. Behind them, Buttons caught the string, wrestled it into submission with the efficiency of a born killer, and then curled up for another nap in his favorite patch of artificial sunlight. 3 months later, the Academy's xenobiology department boasted the most impressive collection of definitely not supposed to be on a space station specimens in the known galaxy. The collection included 2 more shade beast skulls, the preserved remains of something called a void wraith, several pieces of what appeared to be a crystalline entity that fed on mathematics, and a very confused-looking creature that had made the mistake of trying to phase through Dakota's dorm room while they were studying. Buttons had been awarded an honorary doctorate in applied xenobiology, though he remained supremely indifferent to academic recognition. He was much more interested in the fact that his new position as Academy Interdimensional Security Consultant came with unlimited treats and a heated bed in Professor Grex's office. Dakota's final grades in advanced predator studies reflected their practical approach to the subject matter. A plus in fieldwork, a plus in threat assessment, and a special commendation for innovative application of laboratory safety equipment in high-stress situations. But the best part of the whole semester was watching new students discover that the Academy's most feared predator was available for belly rubs during office hours.